Welcome to Inaudible. My name is Jeremy Weiland, and I'm joined by my co host, Nithin Ready. On this podcast, we discuss the weird, beautiful channeled messages found in the archives of organizations like LL Research, Circle R, and others. The archives contain transcripts of messages from allegedly discarnate sources who articulate a philosophy of spiritual evolution. If you would like an audio version of the transcripts, please subscribe to Ryan Masterson's podcast, Living Love and Light, available on all platforms. Nithin and I will try to provide an analysis and commentary on the philosophy described in these messages, identifying the common themes, and grappling with the application of this information to our human lives. Thanks for joining us on this journey. And Nithin, my friend, how are you doing?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm good. My Saturday is off to a good start. And got some stuff going on later on today. I think there's like a neighborhood concert going on, so I'm going to check that out. My buddy who usually does D&D on Saturdays is like, hey, I'm free today, actually, so I might hang out with him. And I'm really excited for tomorrow because in my work with the Industrial Workers of the World, the labor union that I work with, we've been trying to help out Starbucks workers in our neck of the woods organize. And so far, they've had 6 successful votes to unionize. And Bernie Sanders is coming and hosting. Well, I guess he's appearing at basically a big thing called Unity Fest, where like all the Starbucks workers are getting together at a venue, and there's going to be bands, and there's going to be Bernie Sanders and all sorts of stuff. So it's going to be a really fun weekend, I think. And this is a great way to kick it off.
Awesome. Got to feel the burn. I, on the other hand, am doing absolutely nothing except, I guess, still recovering from, a bachelor party in Vegas last weekend. My first post-COVID, I guess, kind of party, although maybe it wasn't so post-COVID based on a lot of the test results that my friends got in the past week. So, yeah, just recovering.
As we've talked about before, I had a sickness like 2 weeks ago where I still have a cough that's lingering, and like I got a negative test result, but who the hell knows, right? Like,
Yeah,
it just seems to me like if we're whatever we do in terms of a society to deal with a thing like a pandemic, we either all do it or we don't. Nobody does it, right? Like, if people do it individually, it just kind of doesn't matter. So like the fact that they have kind of said, hey, everybody take your masks off and go back to life as normal means no matter how much you want to protect yourself, like it's kind of game on now, right?
Pretty much.
Yeah. So it sucks for those of us who are immunocompromised or who have other issues. I do think that this is a little bit premature for the Biden administration to be doing, but at the end of the day, I don't have any control over that. So let's
Well
move.
said.
So let's move on to the things over which we might exercise a modicum of control, right?
Yeah.
And would you like to talk about the topic that you had suggested for us to discuss?
Absolutely. So the topic that I think we're going to get into today is about how best to be service to others when the other can be in a very different path or a very similar path, right?
Right.
And with my, I guess, chosen career and I guess my just personality in life, I'm very drawn to maybe people and places and situations where the energy is very distorted. Right. I work in the criminal justice system. So it often comes up to me personally, how best to be of service, in a variety of situations with a variety of people who are at a variety of understandings, levels, interests when it comes to this sort of I guess, spiritual understandings. A lot of times, right, people are dealing with significant issues in their lives. And if the Confederation material and if my personal life experience is to be believed, a lot of times those significant issues are really related to, spiritual lessons at work or the potential spiritual lessons at play. And so that's why I wanted to kind of delve into just the variety of ways we can be of service. And the Raw and the Confederation have a variety of quotations on that. but it's also something that I feel like my personal life experience has also informed me of.
Yeah, I think we all deal with this situation where we have a philosophy where we seek to be of service, and if we've meditated on it and studied the Confederation's message or any number of philosophies that are out there. I mean, the law of one is not the only one that's useful in this regard. We find that we have to square our striving, our seeking, with a world full of people who are not on the same wavelength as we are. That's the Confederation tells us that that's part of the challenge that we chose in coming to this planet. And so I think the first thing that we might establish is that regardless of how that works out for us, how that teaches us, how that frustrates us, how that inspires us, the different ways that we might choose to achieve a balance on that. It is all good. It is all grist for the mill, and it is all something that is supposed to be a novel situation to help us achieve a balance that we currently do not have. I mean, the first thing to talk about is the ways in which other people are catalysts, right? The way that they serve, their behavior triggers things in us. I think there's a lot of, Tumblr 2013-esque talk about triggering people, but I think that's actually a really good model for the way that Catalyst works. Is that Catalyst triggers things in ourselves that are unbalanced. Other people, their behavior interacts with our vibration in a certain way, and that causes an emotional response sometimes that then we have to square, we have to balance in order for us to ever be of service in a way where we are drawing upon spirit instead of simply reacting, right? Is that kind of like, do you think that's a good place to start?
Yeah, I think that's actually a wonderful place to start because I was thinking along the exact same lines even before you mentioned that. In that, there's a quotation on this, and maybe you have it. It's about that ultimately we're not here to fix things; we're here to love it. But you can still fix things while loving it. It's almost the idea that you can show people the path, or bring, basically you can be there to help people, and you might actually help, hopefully you will help some people, but don't have the expectation of being able to always help people, right? That's kind of like a bonus of just kind of being here and radiating love, right? And Ra also has quotations on this in that they admit that they have a distortion towards teaching and also learning about the law of one, but they kind of say it in such a way that they understand that they should have no expectations that the other will be able to learn from them, right? It's something that they
Yeah.
want to do. They want to be able to help by teaching and helping people, but ultimately at a certain level, if you have that expectation that you are going to be able to help someone, I think that's where the catalyst kicks in, right? And it's very natural to feel like, you might know you've been through something very similar to what the other person's experiencing, and you have the potential to help and to share in your wisdom or whatever hard fought lesson you have learned in your own life. But if you have the expectation that they will be willing to listen to you and they end up not listening to you, you become very disappointed. And this is something that we talk about, you and I right now in the abstract, but I will tell you, I still struggle with it. I know that it's not healthy to have these expectations, but sometimes you still get caught up because you want them to be free of that pain because you were in that pain, right? And you see the potential for them, and then when it just doesn't happen, you're like, oh man. So it can be very catalytic, very catalytic.
And there's so many different flavors of it,
Yeah.
right? Like for me personally, like it's easy for me to accept that people don't want my service in an interpersonal situation. I feel like I deal with that natively pretty well, and that confers no honor on me because it just is the way that I was built. So, but where I do really run into it is when I feel like there's a larger organization involved, and so that person's lack of understanding is impacting not just me but other people, and it's being exaggerated and magnified through the organization. so what I'm talking about is politics, right? It's the political aspect of it that really gets me. I see so much power there. And so it sucks to watch people fritter power away or use it ill, especially when you know them well and you know that they don't mean to do that, you know? But at the same
Mm-hmm.
time, their lessons are their lessons. They're not our lessons. And if we let our own inability to accept the free will of others make us do things that infringe, then that's our responsibility. And also, that's our lesson, right?
Yeah, and it's having that expectation and having that catalyst. It can actually, if you're not careful on the way you approach these situations, it can actually throw you off your path, right? If you infringe upon free will. And Ra talks about how there were some positive wanderers that came to Venus, and they had the goal prior to incarnation of just really helping people polarize positively. But when they incarnated, they were so fixed upon that mission with the expectation that they wanted it so badly that it ended up manifesting in such a way. And of course, it seemed like there was some sort of veil at play that they end up forcing their methods on others, right? And they end up polarizing negatively and causing holy war, right? And they were very surprised after they ended the incarnation that they had graduated to fourth density negative. So it's the desire to help people and help others and serve others can sometimes very easily, or at least in some cases very easily, turn into a desire to control other people, right?
Yeah.
For their own benefit.
Yeah.
And at least in your mind. And that can be a very dangerous thing. So it's very important to, maybe not dangerous is the right word, but it can be a very, it can be a way that will actually make your own path longer, right? And more filled with catalyst.
Yeah, absolutely. I think this is a great time to maybe delve into that quote that you mentioned, because I do think it really applies here, specifically with respect to wanderers, right? How do wanderers deal with the fact that they have incarnated to an environment that, regardless of their choice of it, still gives them some sort of discomfort? And it's so easy to mistake our discomfort with a situation for a sense of wrongness with the situation, where it goes from it's creating a feeling in me to, and that means it's wrong, right?
Right.
So the excerpt that I want to read that includes that quote that you had mentioned is July 31st, July 31st, 2007. And I hope that this is enough context, because I don't want to, spend all day reading out of here. But I think this is a good place to do it. So here we go. This is Kuo. What wanderers usually do not realize is that which is so obvious and easy from the other side of the veil is impossible to read and difficult to bear within the thick veiling of the third density of Earth, with its free will and its extremely thick veil. The danger always is that the wanderer will not wake up, or if it is partially awake, that it will awaken only to complain that it is not comfortable, that it wants to go home, that it must leave this place that is so polluted and dirty. To those who feel these things, we would suggest that it is precisely because this planet is so in need of higher vibrations that you came to serve at this time, to help lighten the vibrations of planet Earth. And you could not do this without incarnating and becoming one of the tribe of humankind. Your love was so great that you took that step, and now you have awakened, and you know how difficult a step it was to take. We encourage you to take hold of the honor and the duty of being a wanderer. That which you know of the higher planes, that which you remember in a dim or not so dim way, bring into your heart and let it bless the environment that you see before you, just as it is. You are not here to clean it up. You are not here to make it right. You are not here to fix it. For all of the outer world is an illusion. You are here to love it. Take the world into your arms and embrace it. This is how you came to serve. This is your glory and your crown. Wear it well and rejoice in being here. That is such a great excerpt.
It's such a great great excerpt.
For me, especially as somebody who's been galvanized by political interest for so long, this took a lot of time to contemplate, because what is the project if it's not to fix it? What is the project if it's not to make it right somehow? And the point is that let me speculate. I think that the goal is, it's kind of like channeling. It's kind of like the whole template of being an instrument, where you connect with your inner self, you connect with the creator, and then you leave it to them to fix things, either through you or through somebody else. But you don't focus on your ego mobilizing the feeling of unrightness, of wrongness, of pollution, or this has been corrupted or something like that. You don't take that feeling and then react to it. You respond by connecting to your deepest self. And then maybe you're part of the solution. Maybe you are laying the foundation for somebody else to bring the solution, or for the person themselves to realize their error. Like, it's not on you to affect, like you said, a specific situation, a specific outcome, because then that builds up expectations that frustrate.
Yeah, the way I think about it these days is that it's a paradox that you see in other contexts, in that, in a certain sense, and this excerpt talks about this. A way of fixing it is by being at peace and accepting and understanding and having faith in not fixing it. Mm-hmm. And that paradoxically will create the energy or help create the energy in the situation such that it will be fixed.
Yeah.
And that paradox, I also see, at least in I don't know how much support there is in the Ra material. There is one quote on this, but it's a paradox I also see when Ra talks about how you can have self-healing. And I think Ra's quote is something like, healing occurs when the mind-body-spirit complex realizes deep within itself that it's already whole. So it's almost like the healing occurs when you realize you don't necessarily need healing because you're already whole, and it's like it's a paradox, right?
Yeah.
And that's how I view this as well.
Yeah,
in a certain sense.
I think it's a really good rubric through which to view it. Like, maybe another way that I have tried to provide a mental construct to myself that helps me take that energy into my practice is to say that the brokenness and the fixedness, the illness and the healing, are only separated by this construct of linear time. They're actually part of the same thing. We're just looking at a certain part of it. And what does the Confederation always ask us to do? To zoom out, to see the bigger perspective, to see the connectedness, to see how the hurt and the healing are part of the same fabric. They're part of the same thing. And so if we can touch into the love that unites those two events across time, then we can partake of that timeless, infinite perspective, and we can not react. We cannot just lash out or have an emotional response to something that doesn't partake of our greater awareness, that greater perspective.
Absolutely. The polarity of any concept, they're interlinked, right? So yeah. I would absolutely agree with that. And also, I find that, at least, I think there's also something energetically at play, because I've seen this in situations where, let me take a step back. There's discussion in the Confederation material about how the energy of society and the energy of others can affect the energetic configuration of an individual.
Yeah.
They talk about a specific, Ra talks about specifically that even though Earth is now fourth density positive as a planet, the societal overlay is third density consciousness, and that overlays and basically has affected many people on this planet, more so than perhaps the actual planetary energies themselves.
Yeah.
On a smaller scale, I've noticed that sometimes when you just hold space for having love and compassion, even in a messed up situation that you might be observing, and you're not directly, for whatever reason, maybe you don't know this situation that you're observing, right? In the criminal justice system, you are often in court, whatever, and you're waiting for another case to finish, and you're not involved in this case, so you're observing, but you'll notice the energies involved, right? And sometimes just holding that space within yourself, I find that sometimes if there's the potential for resonance or a small resonance already present in someone else, it kind of builds upon it. So there's maybe almost like an energetic aspect of it that builds upon itself, and maybe it's related to the squaring concept that Ra talks about to a certain extent. But there's something about the energy in and of itself, which I don't know if you want to put energy in the active category or passive category, but it seems from our physical perspective as something more passive, as something that can have a real impact on the situation.
I think it's great. So I've talked in past episodes about this this capacity to bring different models, different lenses, different like mental constructs into things that we experience, so that we can look at them from different perspectives that seem maybe like they are contradictory, but they actually help us tap into the deeper thing that the construct, the lens, the philosophy is only designed to help us see, right? Like the law of one is not about learning the law of one words, right? It's about tapping into that deeper truth. And in the same way, like I think that a vibrational rubric for understanding our emotions and how they interface with others, other individuals, and the society at large, can help us square some of the things that occur to us that the psyche, that the model of the psyche, that psychology, for instance, offers, doesn't always explain so well. And it's not really about finding a concrete single explanation. It's about finding different ways to use our minds to bring spirit and our deeper selves into manifestation. Here's the kicker, I think, is that anything that helps us do that, anything that helps us tap into that deeper truth on a level that doesn't need to be proven, that is our truest self, and that is beyond proof and beyond certification to ourselves, that's a good thing to use to bring in. So I think that you're right, that in holding space for other people, we can tap into a vibrational way of understanding the dynamics that are going on. And then that can help us instead not try to like defend ourselves, right? Like there is no defense from vibrations, right? Like vibrations they resonate through things. They either interact with us or they don't. There is no defense mechanism per se. You have to balance it. And I think that is one of the virtues of the vibrational energetic model, is that it shows us that our agency is not in counteracting things so much as feeling them, accepting them, and then adding to the chord that those notes are creating, right?
Absolutely. I love your musical analogies of adding to the chord, right?
Yeah.
The note is creating. Beautiful.
Yeah, and I really love the point that you were making about the idea of holding space for those who are in turmoil, because often when we see people who are suffering or who bring some sort of energy or emotion to a situation that we find disturbing, we find discomforting in some way, it's so easy to withdraw. And I think it is part of our animal heritage, our second density heritage, to do precisely that. And, everything withdraws from threat and discomfort in nature. Like it is built into the homeostasis of the organism, right? To seek for stability and to avoid things that jar and dislocate. And so when we accept willingly and freely to absorb that comes from a place of great strength. That is something that is not easily learned and accepted in the self. In fact, I think we need to recognize that willingness to accept discomfort and stress and anger and all these emotions, even when they don't come from within us, is walking the path of adepthood because it's recognizing the self in others. The fact that I am bothered by your vibration means that I have that in me. And it's not just that it means that I have it in me, it's calling to some imbalance in me.
Sorry if I bothered you, Jeremy, man. I didn't mean what I said yesterday. Just so you know, dude. But so one
We'll talk about it later.
we'll talk about it. All right. We'll have a little fist fight afterwards. So one thing that and it's interesting in that this concept of holding space, it's very much something where it's exactly what you said. I recognize the self, right, in others, and it's almost like when I have gone through my own trials, and I recognize the way I dealt with emotions, and then how I was maybe how I was initially dealing with emotions in a very poor manner in my own trials, and then how I learned to deal with it in a better way, and then from that lesson, holding space. So, for example, one thing that I notice a lot of people do, including myself, is that whenever I feel an uncomfortable emotion, especially in the past, hopefully less so now, is that I immediately try to label it, and if it's a bad, if I label it as a bad or not helpful emotion, almost like there's an innate desire to suppress it, right? Mm-hmm. And look, I am a full believer in feeling emotions fully. However, I will caveat that, look, if you're in a work situation where you just have to do something, especially if it's mission critical, look, put your emotions to the side, but revisit them. I would say revisit them later in the day. But barring those situations, I'm talking about a more deep seated kind of desire never to feel those negative emotions, right? At any point. Not that you're super busy right now and you can't take the time. I'm talking about you just don't want to feel it. And on top of that, what makes that suppression or desire to suppress negative emotion even stronger is when there's another conflicting emotion that's also present. So you have two seemingly conflicting emotions, and you decide, you know what, I'm going to suppress one of them, right?
Yeah.
So what I often find, and I try to hold space for in the courtroom, is, and I'll often see this, you know, when there's like a sentencing taking place of where someone is being sentenced, and the victim and the defendant are usually related, right? So, you know, domestic violence, other sorts of cases involving family members, and you'll often see both the defendant and the victim having these conflicting emotions. And I just try to hold space for the idea of just like, it's okay to both love and hate the other person, right? And that you don't have to label it, and you can just feel it. And it almost feels like that is, at least to me personally, energetically, when I'm able to approach my own conflicting emotions about a strongly catalytic situation that way, it feels like I'm letting the energy move through me. I'm being a more perfect vessel for these emotions. And that's the space that I bring from my personal experience into when I recognize the situation occurring outwardly. I don't say anything. I don't like make eye contact. I'm just sitting quietly, right? And I feel like there's a potential that's unlocked if there's even slight resonance in the other self in these situations.
Yeah. Something that I identify in what you're describing, and you tell me if I'm off the rails here. It's a vulnerability.
Exactly.
What we're saying when we say that these vibrations impact us and we can't necessarily defend ourselves, the other side of that is to say we're vulnerable to them. And I have found throughout my life that one of the most effective ways to connect with another human being is to show vulnerability, to make it okay to let your guard down. And so in accepting these emotions and letting them wash over us, letting them have their way with us, you know what I mean? We're admitting our vulnerability, and we are admitting the kind of creatures that we are, that we aren't separate, that the separation is an illusion, and that ultimately we're all going to get each other through this. There's another Kuo excerpt that I would love to read about this, if you're okay. Okay. This
Yeah, let's
is
do it.
March 5th, 2000. This is a session where they had just before this point that I'm reading had gone through the energy centers and talked about the ways in which criticism can impact a person, right? So this is one of the ways that we hurt each other, is by pointing out things that we don't approve, or that, you know, the person doesn't approve about themselves, right? And that causes hurt. And so they're going through the energy system, talking about the different dynamics here. I don't think that's really useful, but for what we're talking about right here. But let me jump in. Okay, so this is Kuo. We took the time to go through these energy centers and to look at some of the, shall we say, high points of each center, because this is a system which you can work with in many different ways. It helps to know how you are made. Any mechanism which is having difficulties remains broken until someone who knows how it is supposed to work can take it and work on it. Your metaphysical beings are such creatures. They do have a rhyme and a reason. They can indeed be drained of energy. And there are things that you can do to mend these broken pieces. To mend those broken places. But until you grasp how your energy works, it is not so easy to sit down and begin to do the repairs. When you have gone through the processes of balancing and forgiveness, then you are once again at peace and at rest, feeling relatively safe in your own skin. However, you remain vulnerable, and this vulnerability is very, very important. It is central to the Earth experience. We would like to frame this vulnerability in a more positive way. For each of you before incarnation was extremely eager to come into the Earth plane and to offer the life experience as a service and gift to the one infinite creator. From a position before the dropping of the veil of forgetting, you could see that you had an opportunity in the darkness of the earth plane to live by faith. You knew that a life in faith outside of incarnation was very easy to achieve, because you, like all other entities not in incarnation, were totally aware of the plan of the one infinite creator, of the beauty of that plan, of the goodness of the adventure of attempting in a world where it was not at all obvious that love abides, that it would help your polarity tremendously to come into this darkness and to express a life lived in faith. It looked easier by far before incarnation than it does now. We are sure that this is an understatement for each of you. It does not look easy at all from within incarnation to deal with difficult people and situations, challenges that seem to rob you of energy. However, all of these difficulties, all of these ways of moving beyond your ability to cope, are moments of great opportunity. For when you are beyond your ability to cope, you still have one choice to make: despair or hope, giving up or digging in, saying, "I'm finished," or saying, "I have just begun." You are entities of great power. Again and again, your outer experience will seem to rob you of that power. Again and again, there will be the level upon which this is accurate. There will be the level at which you have lost power, and underlying this level of apparent experience is a faculty called faith. It lies like a floor that you must believe is there before you can feel it underfoot. It is in times when you are helpless and hopeless and at the end of your human strength that faith will help you soar and fly far above all restraints and limitations. Faith is something that picked up weighs nothing, but planted yields everything. It is in the air about you. It is in the heart within you. It is in the remembering of the mind that is disciplined to reject hopelessness. So you have good work to do when catalyst overcomes you. I'll cut it off there because, man, I just want to keep reading that.
Dude, that's intense. I don't think I've heard that excerpt, and yeah, man, you just lit up my like throat and third eye just by
Yeah.
reading it. So that was amazing. Yeah,
Yeah.
and
I
it
mean,
also hits very close to home, you know. So
yeah, absolutely.
yeah,
This faith is something that we need to talk about. If we're going to talk about how to deal with the indeterminate nature of human encounters. Some of them will be positive, some of them will be negative. All of them are human, all of them are the creator, and therefore, what is the overarching principle that we're going to bring that applies to all these situations, right? That doesn't require us to judge and to slice and dice the human condition into the parts that are good and the parts that are bad. We can only do that from some sort of grounding. And
Yeah.
I like the way that they talk about faith as this grounding. It's the place where we start.
Yeah, and in my own journey, I've really found that faith is actually very grounding, right? And
Yeah.
it's it's such an important it's such an important thing. I definitely am not a master of, of faith by any means, but every day, and it just the importance can't be underestimated. And
Yeah.
and and this is where I think the daily practice is so important. Is that I think many of us, most of us, probably all of us, we are shown signs to help increase our faith, or at least uh, one of their messages or outcomes of these signs is to increase our faith. But unless we've been doing the daily practice and we're more in tune with the subtler aspects of reality, we don't necessarily notice these things. Our daily stresses often overwhelms our ability to notice these things. But man, I can't tell you, just being sensitive and just being able to be aware in the present moment and to notice those small signs that when you look at them, they're not so small after all, and they just build your faith. And it's like a cornerstone, and Ra talks about this in a different aspect of the choice of choosing the positive polarity, and that it's a constant choice, and every single time you practice that choice, the first choice builds upon the second and the third. But I feel that is also true for faith. It builds upon itself.
The thing that I was thinking when you were speaking that really occurred to me, it's kind of like, Jim McCarty has talked about this, and it really resonated with me. You ever find yourself thinking about a difficult situation, a difficult interaction that you are dreading having, you know is coming up, or you know is in potential, and you find yourself engaged in an imaginary conversation with that other person, thinking about the ways that you are going to prevail, thinking about the ways that you're going to handle this to come out on top. I think about that in terms of defense, about how, like, if you are into martial arts and self-defense, you're not trying to look for opportunities to exercise this, but you want to be prepared, right? You want to be
Right.
prepared to defend yourself. To me, what you were talking about was using that kind of energy, but from a faith perspective. You are practicing faith on a regular basis, not because you necessarily know you're going to need it today or tomorrow or any other time, but so you can be ready. And this is very much what I think life is like, at least for me, where I don't know what's going to happen. When things come at me that trigger an emotional response that is negative, they are almost always the things that I'm not prepared for. They're not things that I have prepared a defense for. And that's precisely why they strike so deeply into my heart. In doing a daily meditation practice and in connecting with that deeper level of myself, I affirm that no matter what happens, no matter how badly I react to it, however badly I mess up, I'm coming from a place where I know that all is well, and that therefore I can learn from it. That it's not something that's going to destroy me. I have my. It's kind of like what Carla used to say. If I live in Christ. If I die, I die in Christ. So no matter whether I live or die, I'm in Christ. And I feel that's a very good statement of faith, because it puts the emphasis on what's important instead of putting the emphasis on the details that detract from our awareness of that unified nature of what we experience.
Yes, and I'm still learning about faith, and I think one thing that made maybe building my faith initially more difficult is maybe the misconception I had, that was a similar misconception I had with the concept of acceptance, and I think
Mm.
we've probably talked about this, at least that my definition of acceptance is kind of emotional, your emotional relationship to something, and it does not at all necessarily correlate with an action you are taking or not taking. Like
Yeah.
acceptance doesn't mean inaction or action. It's just how you emotionally relate to it.
Are you
Now,
going to face
obviously,
reality, or are you
right,
going to like create a mind explanation
right,
that makes it good or bad? Right.
right, and so like you can. I think sometimes, at least in everyday lay terms, people often associate acceptance with inaction, and that is not
Passivity.
necessarily true. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
not at all related to passivity. And maybe in certain situations it can be, but it really has no correlation or relationship. You can like I often view it as that I accept and love everyone, including those who uh, maybe have done horrible things and are getting locked up. It's you just because you forgive, accept, and understand a person who is convicted of murder doesn't mean you still won't lock them up. Now, maybe in certain circumstances you might decide to, you know, make an exception to the rules. But I'm just saying it's not related, in my opinion, those concepts aren't related to taking action,
Yeah.
right? And the thing that I think I was struggling with faith is there was, I guess, a belief in me that maybe there was that faith is also related to inaction. But I'm discovering more and more it's not. It's more like a trust in the situation such that you don't have to worry about it. But just because you're not worrying about something doesn't mean you're not gonna still maybe do something about it, right? Or
Yeah.
not do something about it. So that's something I still struggle with because I think a lot of the times when you have faith, once you actually recognize not you don't need to worry about something and to have faith in whatever outcome, it can lead to a change in how you approach a situation, right?
Yeah. Absolutely. I was immediately, when you were talking about this in the context of a court situation, and how, on the one hand, we have a legal system that prescribes outcomes for certain actions, consequences for actions. But on the other hand, the more spiritual and unified nature of things gives us full agency to decide how to respond to things, right? So I see it very interesting in how you square those two things. Because they often might, I could totally see how they might often feel like they conflict, even for you as you're looking at these cases that come before you. There's a Ra quote, session 83, question 14, where they kind of discuss this. Ra says, it is a necessary balance to the intention of law, which is to protect, that the result would encompass an equal distortion towards imprisonment. Therefore, we may say that your supposition is correct. This is not to denigrate those who, in green and blue ray energies, sought to free a peaceable people from the bonds of chaos, but only to point out the inevitable consequences of codification of response, which does not recognize the uniqueness of each and every situation within your experience. So when we apprehend a situation and come to an emotional and spiritual way of thinking about it and seeding it in our experience, in our analysis, in our understanding of things, we have perfect freedom to do that however we want. That has nothing to do with the outworkings of the legal system or any of the other sort of rule-based systems that prescribe if X then Y in our society. I mean, we do live in a society that in some ways kind of functions like a machine, just running on its own logic, running on its own series of action response. And the idea is not that we are supposed to get into that necessarily and fix it or change it or anything, but to, like you were saying, this is why I found it so powerful, to hold the space for all of the emotions, all of the energies that come out of that, so that even in the wake of this kind of harsh mechanistic outworking of things, we can attempt to balance. We can find the love in the situation and bring that to bear if we can get our ego's out of the way about it, right?
Exactly. And I'm going to look up another quote here about basically very similar to holding space.
Cool.
About, and you're probably familiar with this. It's, I think Rod talks about how when there's a lot of negative polarization, that the mere virtue of negative polarization spread across a lot of people serves as almost a black hole to someone who might not normally be negatively polarizing, right? So we're talking about holding space in the positive sense, but it seems like this is a concept that's also at play in the reverse. So it underlies perhaps the importance of the unseen energies at play, right?
Yes, the creative way that our energies interplay with things.
Right.
Yeah, are you talking about the part in the material where they discuss Carla possibly being displaced into
Yeah.
negative time space? Yeah.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. Um, and I guess for those who I don't know if I can find the quote right now. You might be better at finding this, but basically, it's a brief quote where I think they follow up. I guess Carla had a potential situation where they're concerned that she, I guess, would be displaced into a negative density because of the trance channeling she does, where she basically her mind and spirit would be outside of the body. And they followed up on, well, what would happen if that actually occurred? And Ra talks about, well, she would be in, I think, fourth density negative. And even though she's obviously very, very positive, right, sixth density wanderer, that because of the way fourth density negative works, and she'd be surrounded by negative polarity, it'd be like a black hole, and that she would, the only way to progress would be basically to go negative for a while until you made it back up to, I think, sixth density, they said. Which actually brings us to, I think, another point that I wanted to mention, in that, how do you serve? What is the appropriate service when you're in contact with someone who you're pretty confident is polarizing negatively, right? And at this point, they probably, if you're asking this question, there's probably some interaction where they want something from you, right? Or they're making a request from you, of you. And, Ra talks about this in, basically, let's bring it up. So this is a 67.11. Consider, if you will, that you have no ability not to serve the Creator, since all is the Creator. In your individual growth patterns appear the basic third density choice. Further, there are overlaid memories of the positive polarizations of your home density. Thus, your particular orientation is strongly polarized towards service to others and has attained wisdom as well as compassion. You do not have merely two opposite requests for service. You will find an infinite array of contradictory requests for information or lack of information from this source if you listen carefully to those voices you may hear. And just skipping down to the main aspect where they talk about this. Could you then serve a negative entity by offering this instrument's life? And I guess in this case, there is a negative entity who wanted to end Carla. And Ra goes on to say, it is unlikely that you would find this a true service. Thus, you may see in many cases the loving balance being achieved, the love being offered, light being sent, and the service to self-oriented entity gratefully acknowledged while being rejected as not being useful in your journey at this time. Thus, you serve the one Creator without paradox. And really, I just see Ra as saying is you set boundaries and you realize you're on different paths. And you don't necessarily, I guess, operate from a need of defending yourself. More of a recognition that they are just on a different path, and that true service wouldn't be giving into what they wanted.
Yeah, there's a excerpt that we read a couple of episodes ago where they talk about the difference between right and wrong and what's mine and not mine. What I see being laid out here is that this is a situation where instead of saying like your service to self in evil, therefore I must resist you, you're saying that's not my path. Now,
Right.
the interesting thing about this excerpt that just occurred to me is that it implies that our service is something that we are putting out there as a creative expression of ourselves. Like, it's one thing to give another person what they ask for, but then we have to make the decision to actually give it. And it's not enough that, when another asks for our service or when another is in a situation where it seems our service is requested, we often don't have enough information about that request, about that need, about that desire to give them exactly the thing that they have in mind as being service. I mean, this is why Ra talks about that the best way to serve others is to put yourself in their shoes, right? But that's still an imaginative act. That's still a creative act that we are engaged in. And it's not clear exactly whether we get that quote unquote right or not. So the other aspect of this is that we have to offer from the deepest part of ourselves for it to be the greatest service. And then if that service is rejected, it is the role of the adept, of the person who is walking that path and wanting to serve more and more adequately, more and more truly to the Creator, to take a rejection of their service in exactly the same spirit of generosity as you would take the acceptance of the service, right? If somebody
Yes.
rejects my service as not useful to them, they have done me a service.
Yes.
I learn from that. And that was something that we actually discovered in a session we did at last summer's channeling intensive, where in a session on service, Lytos was talking about, hey, even when your service goes awry, that teaches you. If you leave that out of your learning, if you just say, oh, well, that service didn't work, I'm just going to disregard it. No. Like, that's part of what makes it okay to live from the heart and to give freely, is to know that when it's not accepted, you can also learn from that too.
Absolutely. And I think we're talking about big picture, how
We always
this
talk big picture on this podcast.
big picture about the service an entity can offer is definitely unique to that. It's an interaction of what the request might be from the other self, and also what the the entity
Who
who
you
wants
are.
to serve,
Yeah.
who they are. And I think that's very, very important because, I've talked about this in other contexts. Like, I'm naturally more of an introvert and other people are extroverts. So we could both be interacting with the same party, and they might, like, let's say someone who truly wants to learn more about some concept, where, and this is just me artificially creating a contrast here. So maybe Jeremy, you'd be like, hey, let's just grab a cup of coffee and just talk about it, right? Whereas I'm like, hey, here's a book, go, and ultimately we're both trying to serve the same call for service, but yet we're trying to do it in a way that honors our own
Bingo.
self as
Yes.
well. And that's very, very
Absolutely.
important, that it's not going to be the same, exact same. And so this concept of, holding space even, maybe
Yes.
it's going to be done in different ways, right?
Yeah.
So it's very important to understand that you have to also not only recognize perhaps what the call for service is, but also what is within you that is able to respond and meet that call.
Oh, I couldn't have said it any better, Nithin. This is exactly what I was getting at, that when we talk about service and the propriety of this service or that service or or withholding service or whatever, like, we always talk about it from the point of view of like, what should we do for that person? But it's a dynamic relationship. We are serving ourselves as well when we serve another. And we're doing it both in that like figurative way that partakes of a definition of self that is everybody, right? But we're also doing it in that narrow way that it's something that we are engaged in. And to the extent that we made a specific choice to manifest that desire in this particular way, we spun it in some way. We gave it an aspect that is unique to us. And when it goes to that other person, it either is rejected or accepted or somewhere in between, right? Like that will tell us something about ourselves too. And we have served ourselves and served the learning of ourselves just as much as that other person.
Well said. Well said.
Yeah, this is really cool. See, this is what I like about this podcast is that when I have these conversations, we discover these new places, and I love the idea of the listener being able to watch this happen, right? To listen to it happen, and to say like, this is how humans live this philosophy. It's not by doing things perfectly. It's about having these insights that come from deeply digging into these things and speaking from the heart and from the mind.
Absolutely. And, as you can, as a listener, and Jeremy, as you're probably well aware at this point, a lot of these realizations come from not just studying these concepts in meditation, but having the daily practice where you see these concepts and hopefully you're trying to put them into practice in your daily life, and then evaluating in some way the success or the progress towards putting them into practice in your daily life. Because a lot of these things we're talking about, it's like, we've tried and we failed, but we learned from it, and that informs the next attempt, so that we can get closer to, I guess, what we are hoping to achieve, to learn.
Yeah, in the same way that our service to others, by our choice of how to express it, teaches us something about the thoughts and feelings and emotions that went into that choice of expression. It's the same as what you were saying. The ability to apply these principles, we have to make a choice on how that happens. Being in incarnate life in manifestation means that we're trying to take inchoate, overarching, infinite ideas that come from our spirit complex. I believe that abstract moral and ethical principles are kind of like the shadow cast by our spirit complex in our minds. And we try to, look at this country. We have these high ideals. Do they come into manifestation all the time? Hardly. Hardly. In the same way, like our deepest beliefs and principles, we don't always act on them perfectly, but it is precisely by throwing the ball against the backboard that we learn how to sink a 3-pointer. Like we need that interaction. We need the inflection point of manifestation, of bringing spirit down, it seems, into manifestation, and then seeing how it plays out, and then we learn from that. Otherwise, we're not using this experience, I shouldn't say otherwise, because we're always learning. Like this was one thing I wanted to say is like about our topic that we're talking about is that how do we deal when we're walking the path? How do we deal with people who aren't on the path? Well, from one point of view, everybody's on their own path, right? Like everybody is on the path. They may just be on different points on it. Their path may be slightly different than ours. So we know for sure that no matter how badly we think we mess up, we are serving as a learning opportunity for ourselves and that other that we encounter. And so faith is about how can we dilate our our consciousness, our awareness, our perception of this thing that seems so fraught in the small picture of the present of the thing that we're dealing with right now. How can we dilate out and see a bigger picture there so that we put the proper emphasis on those discrete decisions to manifest, and that we understand that we are doing our best right now. The other self that we are encountering, for all that we may judge them for, they're actually doing the best they can right now. And the point is to give spirit, I believe, to give the Creator another opportunity to breathe that breath of infinity and unity into a situation that seems broken and muddied and dull and fraught.
Absolutely, and that reminds me of one thing that one raw quote that helped me build some self-compassion about. I guess sometimes when I was on this path, I almost felt obliged and I didn't listen to myself, that sometimes you feel drained, right? Sometimes you
Oh
feel
yeah.
like you might recognize that there's some sort of call for service, and that you could being the operative word, could assist, but for whatever reason doesn't feel like you're drained. It doesn't feel right. There's something about the situation that just you just don't feel like doing it. And there's many variations of this basic fact pattern. I guess unfortunately for me,
It sounds
it's
like a sense of duty involved here.
right, right.
Yeah.
And one specific way this comes up and has come up is sometimes when you have a friend or someone you know who I think we've all had this this friend, and we've all been this friend where you have some sort of issue or problem, and you whoever has this issue or problem is talking to another person, and is asking for a solution, but and the other person offers a solution, right? And in this scenario, we would you and I would get to the root of the issue and offer a very clear spiritual solution. Like ultimately, this is kind of what's at play, right? And this is what
I would hope.
this is how to. I mean, at least if it's something basic or something
Yeah.
we've dealt with ourselves. And
I get really confused sometimes, though.
yeah, you confuse me sometimes too. So
I know.
it's all good.
I know.
And here's something you can do to put into practice. But then they don't put it into practice, and they come around again with that same genuine problem. Maybe it reoccurred, right? And you feel their pain. Like
Yeah.
they're not being misleading you as to their pain. They're clearly in some sort of pain, and they ask again, and you kind of go through the same thing again, and then a third, a fourth, a fifth time, maybe in a very short span of time, or it feels like a very short span of time. I've thought like, what am I supposed to do? Like, and sometimes obviously, before we get to the stage where you're like, man, you're kind of fed up. We're all nice and creative people. We try many different ways of explaining things or different solutions, whatever seems like maybe would be better situated for their situation, right? But they just seem like they're not interested in any of it, right?
Yeah.
So there's actually kind of a raw quote that is directly on point, and this is 60.25. Questioner: am I to understand then that the Confederation entity needs communication equipment and craft to communicate with the third density incarnate entity requesting the information? Ra: I am Ra. This is incorrect. However, many of your peoples request the same basic information in enormous repetition, and for a social memory complex to speak ad infinitum about the need to meditate is a waste of the considerable abilities of such social memory complexes. And there's another talk about requesting duplicate information, this 60.27, and just cutting to the end of that. Here's the funny part. Please note that as Confederation members, we are speaking for positively oriented entities. We believe the Orion group, which is negative, has precisely the same difficulty. Once this basic information is received, and is not put into practice in the heart and in the life experience, but instead rattles about within the mind complex distortions, as would a building block which has lost its place and simply rolls from side to side uselessly, yet the entity still calls. Therefore, the same basic information is repeated. Ultimately, the entity decides that it is wary of this repetitive information. However, if an entity puts into practice that which is given, it will not find repetition except when needed. So bottom line, I think it's hilarious that both positive and negatives have, I guess, people who would wish to learn their paths, but aren't willing to put stuff into practice. But bottom line, if someone's not putting into practice something that you feel could genuinely help them, it's okay to be like, it's okay to maybe disengage a little bit. It's okay. It's understandable.
Yeah, it's because unlike the Confederation, we don't have the ability to take our interaction with that person and to create some sort of robotic answering machine that just spits out the same information over and over. In this life, with this equipment that we have to have enormous patience to say the same thing over and over and over again with no expectation that they will get it this time. That's a lot to expect of a third density human being, I think. But one thing that I was thinking about was that it could be, right, an opportunity to try to exercise some creativity. Okay, so they're not hearing what I'm saying in this way. What other way could I say it? This is dangerous because I find that when I go down this path, I often find the way to say it that really pisses them off, right? Like you just get a little bit too low in the series of illusions that they've built.
You
up,
always
right?
go low,
Like,
man. Always.
yeah. When they go low, we go low. But that's where it's at the foundations where the opportunity to heal most occur. Like
Right.
so it does take patience to deal with someone who is legitimately asking for help and is confused by their own distortions, and to slowly help them. You're helping them do the work on themselves, right? Like that's the thing. Like we need to recognize that we don't really help another entity. Ross says this: we don't help. We offer an opportunity, and they do the work or not. Whether this is
Absolutely.
physical healing, whether this is balancing distortions, anything like that, that takes a lot of the pressure off of us. But it also means that it's frustrating when someone we care about won't take it upon themselves to do that. I mean, I think that that's always going to be an aspect of the human condition. Our respect for another's free will seems often in conflict with their desire to suffer from our point of view, right? like
Right.
just get over this. But like if they could, they would, right? So like it's important to understand the proper the proper role of our agency in service. That it is a creative act that we are doing, but we're not the only thing that's necessary for somebody to heal or to grow or to balance. Like, in fact, isn't that kind of a like a narcissistic idea that like, oh, if we can't solve it for the other person, then they're lost. So we have to like be there for them. No. Most people have lots of resources, and if we can't figure it out, we should not take that hard. If we can't help them, if we can't reflect to them that exact image of the creator and of themselves that helps them untangle this, that is no knock on us. It also is the case that maybe our service to that person in helping them work through their distortions is just something that they need a longer amount of time than we're measuring the success or failure of our
Right.
We like to think of it as like, oh, I'm going to tell you this, and then you're going to have the cloud, the light break through the clouds, and there's going to be a sunbeam on you,
Right.
and you're going to get your third eye is going to blow up, and you're going to look like an Alex Gray painting, right? But actually, we are just one part of the creator through many, many different people interacting with them and teaching them different aspects of this. So it's not all about you, dude.
Yeah, I mean, and it's really the long game, right? Like you just
It's the long game.
You might plant the seed, and it is very important to be patient and be creative, and ultimately just don't. I've noticed for myself, don't fall into the trap of having the expectation that you'll see the change, right?
Bingo.
And also, kind of also related to this, and this is more. It depends on the culture of the society you're in. You can give unsolicited advice even if there's a solicitation, because you're not really genuinely tapped into what is being requested and asked. They might just want to be. Some people enjoy their victimhood. Some people enjoy talking about their problems, and they might seemingly want a solution. But if you're actually listening to more than just their words, and you're tapped into kind of the situation and energy of it, they're not looking for an answer. They actually enjoy sharing their problems with others. It gives them a self-identity. Now, I'm not saying you should prejudge people in these categories, but once you're at a certain stage where you're more in touch with your own intuition, you'll notice situations where you're like, if you just listen to the words and language being used, they're like, oh, they're asking for help. But then you realize they're really not, right? And you often see this, or at least I often see this kind of situation with people, basically drug addicts who haven't hit rock bottom, and they say they want help, but you can tell from the actions they're immediately committing, and also just their kind of energy. And you have to be careful. You don't want to prejudge people. And I don't, even if I think that they're not genuine, if they usually ask me, I'll try to provide some sort of help, right, guidance. But I can tell that when I notice these things, I don't necessarily try to dig really deep if I don't feel it's a genuine request for aid, and
That's fair.
it's a complicated interplay because sometimes if you offer up too much, if you kind of give them a person a roadmap before they're ready, it'll actually have the reverse effect. Sometimes I've noticed that
Yeah.
they don't want, because they've heard it before, they ignore it then in the future as well.
Right.
And it's a very interesting dynamic, and that I think that I don't know, I've become aware of as something that can occur.
It's one thing to say that you don't judge this person that is distorted in some way that you can recognize, right? It's another thing to say that, but there has to be some appraisal of the need, of the desire, for you to be able to give them what they desire. So this is what's really, this is to me the thing that is so paradoxical about service to others. We are supposed to serve others as they desire, but they don't always tell us what they truly desire.
Exactly.
And so we have to take the whole person into account, the whole entity into account, if we go off of words, which I have a propensity to do that, not because that's what I'm good at or anything like that, but because that's the most obvious thing. That takes the least amount of interpretation from me, to just take them at their word. And often, I think that is the free will way to engage with someone, to take them at their word, to set aside the things that you might be sensing, and to just take them at their word. Sometimes I think that is the way to render service.
True.
Other times, I think you really need to expand into the other, to expand into that part of the creator that the other is showing you, to recognize that it's showing you things that you may or may not like about yourself, just as much as it's showing you about the situation that you apprehend. And to recognize that you are going to have to be very intuitive and creative if you are to serve the other as they desire. You're also going to have patience for yourself, that you may not get it right. And to know when to abandon ship. Like doubling down on service that's not requested is not necessarily a good thing. It's just going to teach you a very harsh lesson, right? And
Right.
it might distort the other more, but we're all distorting each other. The downside of the social memory complex raw, the downside, the weakness, is they have such a high-minded, articulate, clear view of the drama of third density that they can often make it seem easier to interact with than it actually is. It is actually super confusing.
It so is.
It's confusing for us. It's confusing for them. The confusion just piles upon itself.
Agreed.
Have compassion. Have compassion for yourself first. And I think that we start to feel into others' needs best when we recognize that the compassion for the self and the compassion for the other arises from the same point. It is actually the same thing. And that is not something that's going to make sense to us mentally all the time. We need to practice meditation and the capacity to think and feel in ways that don't get reflected in our consciously directed thoughts all the time, recognizing there's an aspect of ourselves that we bring to bear on situations that isn't about our intellect. It isn't about even our personality, right? It's about something much deeper. The more that we can trust in that and letting go and letting that deeper part of ourselves bring to bear what it feels, the more that we won't have to bear the burden of figuring it out for them. Because that's what it often feels like to me, at least. Okay, well, Jeremy, when you say that it's a creative act to figure out how to serve, it sounds like you're being a big brainiac and trying to figure out how to dodge their bullets, dodge their distortions and their blind alleys, and get to the root. I'm not trying to be Luke Skywalker putting the torpedo right in the ventilation shaft, right? Like, I'm trying to offer everything that I have. They select what they want. I feel like when I'm doing it right, they are deciding what of the service I've made available they want to tap into. And then that's the way that they tell me what they desire. But I have to offer all of it, or I don't know whether I have something that they need or not. How do you do that in life? I couldn't say. Like, this is what you were just talking about with me last night. It's like, Jeremy, you got to give people examples of this. Like, you can't just talk in the abstract all the time. Like, because then I'm doing what I just described Rod doing, right? So let me offer an example of this. I had a friend who was having a situation. See, this is the thing. I don't want to give too much detail, but in a situation where they're dealing with, let's say, a relationship problem, what's the thing that our friends come to about us more than relationship problems? And so when they do this, when I'm at my best, when I have seen it connect and spark that thing that both of us are looking for, when he makes the request and I try to fulfill the request, you know when you've hit on something. And so I'm trying to tap into those times in my life where I've hit on something. And usually what I do when I'm at my best is that I'll respond immediately with the one thing I see. And then they come back and talk. And usually it's like, well, like, it sounds like they're going through a difficult time, and, maybe you shouldn't just take personally all the things that they're saying to you. And then they come back with some, usually in that scenario, they'll come back and say, no, it's really hurting me. I can't just do that.
Yeah.
And that's completely legit, right? Like, I know that I can't always do it when I'm hurt by my wife. So I can understand that. And so that kind of, one thing I could do is I could say, well, then don't ask me for help, right? Like, why are you coming to me for help? Like, sounds like I don't have what you want.
Some people do that.
Some people do that. Dude, I've done that before. Like, okay, like, move on, dude. But when I'm at my best, that bounces back to me. And then it's like, oh, so they're really hurting. So what they need, what I have to offer that they need, isn't an analysis of the situation going on. What they need is to be comforted.
Exactly.
I have often found that I try to figure things out for people, but when I comfort them, they figure it out.
That's very interesting.
It's not about me giving them the solution. It's about me making it, dude. The clouds are parting here. It's holding space for them and giving them the comfort so that they can find it. A lot of times, don't you find that people who are really balanced and connected and radiate in that service to others way, they create an environment that you enter into, and suddenly you see yourself more clearly.
Yes, absolutely. I think what you're talking about, I absolutely find that I've experienced it myself, but it's usually people who are closer friends of mine, and I interact with a lot of acquaintances and a lot of strangers, and I notice in those situations, comforting them usually doesn't. I mean, well, then again, I don't know how often I follow up and I'm able to see the results. But I get the distinct.
The other side of comforting is enabling, right?
Right. I think when I'm dealing with people who maybe are very much would be considered people who are asleep, and there's no judgment, right? Just people who are not necessarily at that stage yet. When I comfort them, well, either way, I end up trying to show them, offer a service and show them the deeper maybe patterns at play, but I don't force it because, you can't really describe deeper patterns to an acquaintance or some stranger easily. So if they're not, if they're not interested in it early on, I'm like, all right, I'll just comfort you, dude. Yeah. But I get the distinct impression that it doesn't really help them learn spiritually. But you know what? There's a raw quote on this, and I think you actually marked it down in some of your notes. It's 89.30. Would Ra's attitude towards the same unharvestable entities be different at this nexus than at the time of harvest of third density? Ra, not substantially. To those who wish to sleep, we could only offer those comforts designed for sleeping. Service is only possible to the extent it is requested. We were ready to serve in whatever way we could. This still seems satisfactory as a means of dealing with other selves in third density. It is our feeling that to be each entity which one attempts to serve is to simplify the grasp of what service is necessary or possible. And I think this is a good quote, and it segues into just our lay understanding of compassion. If someone's coming to you with an issue, and even though you might see the underlying things at play and you can offer up a permanent solution, but they're not ready for it, just be there for them, right? Comfort them.
Yep.
And that comports with what my understanding of just basic compassion is. And it also, from our esteemed colleague Ra, or maybe I shouldn't call him a colleague, but basically that you are also serving those who wish to sleep by just offering them comforts designed for sleeping. That's a part of it. Now, if you, or I will say this for myself, I definitely get more personal satisfaction if they figure it out, but that's on me, right? That's my expectation.
Right.
That's all me. So either way, it's about having a heart and just being there as another human being and offer whatever service that they are able to receive.
And they also reiterated this thing we talked about. It is our feeling that to be each entity which one attempts to serve is to simplify the grasp of what service is necessary or possible. It's almost an imaginative act, is it not?
Yes.
We imagine what it's like to be them, recognizing that our mental and emotional picture of that other person is colored by our own distortions, right? So we're recognizing right away that like we're dealing with a simulacrum. We're not dealing with the real thing, but we use that as a way, hopefully, with compassion, to dial in how to serve them, accepting that there may be nothing in our picture of the other self that provides an opening. But I do think that it was also cool that they said we were ready to serve in whatever way we could.
Yes.
In other words, every single thing we had to offer was on offer. And I think maybe that's where we often struggle, is that there are some things we don't want to do. I think of this in terms of people who are in extreme need, like the homeless. Like there are some things we're not willing to do. And to the extent that we can imagine ourselves in their shoes and balance our distortions incrementally over time, I think what we do is we expand the resources that we have to offer so that, I don't have to decide not to offer my house to them. Not because it wouldn't help them, not because they may or may not want it. Well, no. That's exactly why. I think that we have to really enter into that person's frame, as painful as that can often be, and see that actually what they need isn't something that strikes us initially as the thing that they lack, right? Like we think the thing they lack is like material resources, but often it's friendship. Often it's companionship and love and being respected, being
Right.
seen, by another human being. That's what a lot of homeless people say, is that they feel invisible. They feel like their suffering doesn't matter and that it doesn't matter whether they live or die. And like often just apprehending a person who's in that kind of turmoil and recognizing it and letting it wash over you, right? That vulnerability to their energy, and saying like, you're worthy of being apprehended, of being perceived. This isn't supposed to be commentary on homelessness. It's simply the idea that like when we enter into that frame, we often bring to the table our prejudgment of what the needs are. Whereas if we just open up everything that we have, we might be surprised at what's actually needed.
Yeah. I love interacting with homeless just because I've had to do it so much. But the example you just gave reminded me. It brought something to light that I've studied years ago, and it's related to the concept of enabling, and that sometimes providing comfort. So let me take a step back. I think, would you agree that in your own life, you recognize that some of your distortions and the choices you've made because of those distortions lead to a feedback mechanism of specific catalysts occurring because of your choices that now cause you discomfort, right? There's like a feedback mechanism, right?
Yep,
And
there is.
and what I've noticed is I can see that feedback mechanism. And look, this doesn't come up often. I try not to prejudge. I always try to be very humble. But sometimes the feedback mechanism that I see another person going through is just so abundantly clear, like it's just so obvious, right? And sometimes these parties, once again, as I said, usually this is in substance abuse situations, and the feedback mechanism at play is so obvious, right? And that and this is related to when I said that someone might ask for help, but it's not genuine in a certain sense. And they ask for assistance, right? And you're like, okay, well, they don't want spiritual help; they just want some comfort. But I've actually felt in some circumstances, and that the most loving thing you can do is to be there for them as a person, but to refuse their overt ask for help, because it actually shields them from their own feedback cattle. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's almost like I feel like I'm enabling them to avoid facing what the consequence of their own actions. And I'm not trying to be mean about it. It's just like, it almost feels like if I was to do what they wanted, I would then become karmically involved in their lesson. Yeah. You know?
I understand that, but like, here's the thing: this gets back to what we were talking about before. You could only make that determination that you just described by apprehending a larger other self than what they presented to you with their words, right? Like looking into their eyes, like maybe knowing something about their history, like seeing a broader entity than just the physical talking entity in front of you. And that's what I think they mean, that that's an imaginative step. That's a step that requires us to be creative.
Yes.
So it's not those of Ra are not giving us rules to follow. That's maybe the thing that like people get hung up when they first encounter the law of one, is that it seems so open-ended, and they try to look for these like rigid principles that they can live by, because that's what most spiritual systems are about. They're about these rigid principles, or religion, I guess, is the one that's most like that. No. These are principles that are supposed to work within you, so that you can bring your true self to bear and see another self as they truly are, and then perhaps offer some interaction, some exchange of energy that leaves both of you understanding something new and novel about themselves, the other self, and the creator, right?
Yeah. Man, this entire discussion, I feel like there's a lot of concepts that have become more crystallized, and that I will need to like process it, later on in meditation. It's good stuff.
Same here.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that, because we have meditation practices, there's a place for this rattling brick to seat itself. Right.
Yeah.
Like that's exactly how those of Ra talk about it. They're like, you can, and I did this for a long time where I read the law of one. I intellectually appreciated it. It resonated, but I thought of it more as like a philosophy that I like intellectually follow. And the more and more that I meditated and let it marinate in me, the more I saw that the lessons of the Confederation are multidimensional, and that they have a life that extends in all three axes. And if I'm only focusing on one, then I'm not fully appreciating it. And then it leads to some distortion in how I execute on it, that it creates that feedback mechanism that you were talking about, right? So the more, like, you don't have to figure out how to serve others. You don't have to figure out how to be creative. You have to become more yourself.
Yes. It's a journey of self-discovery.
And that's walking the path.
Yeah.
Yep. Well, we're just about the 1 hour and 30-minute mark. How are you feeling about where we're at? You want to keep going, or
I think this is good. We've covered a lot of what
I think
I
so.
want to cover. So
I think we've covered a lot of ground. And didn't it seem like it took like 10 minutes, man?
Yeah, no, it's crazy.
This is this is what I hope the listeners hear is like, we want to talk to the listener, not as a audience member marketed to as a demographic, as a fellow traveler on this path, where like this is the conversation, listener, that I would hope to have with you, of just sharing our lives and like celebrating when these insights occur, because they happen for all of us. And it's just, I have the privilege, Nithin has the privilege, Ryan has the privilege of capturing it in a recording. That's the only difference, right?
Yeah, it's just also beautiful, man.
Yeah, it is so beautiful. And I'm so grateful for you joining me, Nithin.
Thank you for having me as always.
Yeah, it's really a blessing. I'm so glad that our friendship has been able to blossom out of, going to homecomings and just seeing each other once in a while. Like now I feel like we talk all the time, and it's super awesome.
Yeah, no, man, I'm so glad we connected. It's really been an awesome experience.
Yeah. And for the listeners' edification, Ryan is alive. He's doing great. He's just got a lot of work going on. So we're going to give him some space. I'll be joining Nithin, I'm sure, on future episodes. I'm going to try and get Joseph D'Artez back. There's a topic in particular that I want to talk with him about and pick his big brain. And I've had intimations that Jade Norby, one of the other members of the working group, is willing to record with me. So we'll get our first female on the podcast. And I am so excited to find out what she would like to talk about. And maybe we can even get some group discussions going on. I mean, that one that I did with Joseph and Ryan was super awesome as well. There's no reason it has to be just a two-way conversation. So, listener, I'll keep you posted. I wish you the very best as we get into the spring here in the Northern Hemisphere. And, of course, friends, stay in the love and light.